This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote ideas to the meaning of the word?
Hello.
Yo.
What's up?
Tell me something good that happened this week, Chris.
I woke up to like 4 chargebacks this morning.
Oh,
And I was like, it's a great way to ruin the morning where you're like, and of course, the worst part is the chargeback costs you like $15 for a $9 a month subscription. So like, even if you win the chargeback, you still lose $6 for each one. And I'm like, this is dumb.
oof.
So for somebody who, can easily write me an email and say, hey, could you give me a refund? I would be happy to do that. Instead, you come around and knife me in the back.
Oof.
I'm like, chargebacks I get their purpose. And if you're dealing with a shitty business, then yes, they're important. But I hope I'm not that. So
Right.
I try not to be, right? So it hurts. But yeah, I have the opposite of something good that happened this week, but maybe
Come
we can
on.
fill in with happier things.
Come on, you got to have something good. Give me one good thing.
Oh, I don't know. We
You
got
get to hang out.
We got our steps to go see our upstairs for the house. And I think next week they got trusses going up. So I'm
There we
excited
go.
about that. Except it's just like raining a bunch now and just before the roof goes on. So
Leave it at good. Leave it at good.
there's always some extras, right?
That's exciting, though.
Yeah.
Andrew, tell me something good that happened to you.
Last week I was sad, and this week I'm not as sad. So
Great.
better.
Boom.
What about you, Jason?
Ooh, something good. My
You
mom
can't
was
be
in the
unprepared for this answer.
Yeah, okay. This
asked
is
the
your
question.
thing, bro.
it didn't even cross my mind that this would get asked back to me when I asked it. I don't know. So my mom was in the hospital last week with COVID and she got out Sunday. So that is a good
That is
thing
good.
for this week. Yeah.
It's very good. Oof.
A lot of emotions, mostly around like, we can't go to the hospital with her. Also, like, we couldn't like really talk to her for like 4 or 5 hours. So yeah. Anyway, I got through that weekend. She's home. And pro tip for anyone who lives in an area like I do with lots of COVID right now, if it's hard to get tests, order them online from Walgreens and then stock up on them. So when you do need it, you got it. So I'm starting a unlicensed rapid testing resale business in my home.
Okay. That's
Not really,
good. Question
not
mark.
really doing that. Not really doing that.
Question mark.
Not really doing that. But I do have them because I'm OCD and want to make sure that I have the test. So,
Better
Ugh.
safe than sorry.
hey, well, that's my good news, COVID.
Good.
Sweet.
Well, this week we've got Andrew Sabetta as our guest. Andrew, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. First off, I want to say, Jason, I'm sorry to hear about your mother, but I'm very happy she's doing better because that's brutal. I'm so sorry to hear that. And Andrew, glad you're doing better this week. And Chris, congrats on the house. And with
Thanks.
that being said, my name is Andrew Sabetta. I've been an application web developer for almost 15 years. I've owned a couple businesses. Recently just went out completely on my own the last year or so. I do work on all sorts of platforms, all sorts of everything for clients, and I do consulting for them for development work and that sort of thing as well. The name of my business right now is Sabetta Consulting, original I know. One of the things I've always been trying to do is do things for myself, which is kind of how I kind of maybe build a project or do something. That's not always client-based. It's nice to turn on for yourself. That's kind of how I kind of weaseled my way onto the show today. We got a good conversation going with Chris, and we wanted to keep it going.
Yeah. You should dig into like what were your businesses and stuff in the past. I'd love to hear about those.
Yeah, so the biggest one was I did an IT consulting and development business. That was the first one I started. I did it right out of college. I'd worked for the university I went to for a little while, and I saw the way they operated. So I got a chance of like the bureaucracy kind of things and how things work in the bigger area and developing. We did a lot of like projects for different departments on campus, and that was fun. And I was like, you know what? I want to do this on my own. So me and a couple of buddies, we started it up, and it was one of those things where we started trying to do application development and web development. This was like 2007, and it was like people wanted cheap websites, everything else. So other friends like, we could fix computers. So we ended up doing like heavy IT consulting with some development that grew as we went. Eventually, it just kind of split half and half, and I just said that. So I decided to kind of sell off my part of the business and start just doing the development and the consulting of just the software side on my own. I just wanted to kind of see what I can do. So that's what I did just last year, actually, after about 13 years in the other business. So, but I've worked on everything from, I was dating myself, but Application Express from Oracle and things like that for the university I went to was big into that. I've done Java, C#, C++, and a lot of PHP. And then I just recently in the last year or two really wanted to focus on Ruby and Rails because I wanted to get, being a solopreneur, so to speak, I was like, you know what, I don't have a team anymore. I kind of wanted to do something that will do a lot of the work, and Rails just like, yeah. So that's kind of what I've been doing since.
So you didn't want to be fixing printers and stuff anymore?
No. But I'll tell you which printer to buy all day. I just don't want to be the one that sets it up and troubleshoots scanners particularly. But
yeah. I bet. Yeah.
Probably not the one sitting beside me, I'm guessing.
Probably not. Yeah, no, it's I just like solving problems in general. I think that's what kind of got me started on programming. And so it's just like the whole IT side of it, that's, you know, underlying it's everything. It's solving problems. So
were you in CS in school?
Computer science major, and for some reason I was stupid and did a math and physics minor. That just extra work that got me that I don't use at all anymore. But like it was an interesting time because that was when they were really switching over to Java. So like half of it was in C++. And then we took like object-oriented programming, which is in Java. But, you know, but I got a good taste of like, I actually liked that because I got a kind of a smattering of everything. So it was just like, I was the last class to actually get any C+ in, which was like interesting because it's like nothing's like that anymore in terms of just having to allocate things and do things and strong typing. And, you know, so anyway, it's just, not this job is not the same, but it's just things will move a lot more toward the scripting side of things. But got a good experience. I know just mentioned, I know on this podcast where I got into assembly too and that. So we did all that kind of stuff too. So that was, you really appreciate the high level languages.
Yeah. If you start with Ruby or Python or something, like you understand variables, but at a like lightweight understanding of it, where there is memory allocation happening and garbage collection and all this stuff going on behind the scenes. But it's very, I would imagine that it's very hard to like wrap your head around, you know, if I say like users.all, I can understand you pulled out all the users out of the database, but I don't probably understand that like every user has to go and allocate a string for the email and the first name and the last name and every field, and then wrap those in an object. And then I got to do that 1,000 sometimes. And I feel like that having done some C+ and C and Java and assembly and whatever probably gives you a bit more understanding of like, thank goodness I don't have to deal with that stuff, but at least you can keep it in mind when you're writing your code, you know, because I think that just is kind of a hard thing. If you started with Ruby and you do like a map or something on an array, you don't realize like, oh, I'm creating 2 arrays in memory. And then eventually I get rid of the one, but you know, being able to actually understand that is an interesting thing that I think, yeah, I don't know. I appreciate that I learned it kind of the hard way with C first and so on. But yeah.
It also kind of makes it so it's tougher for me to like, when I got to get to Rails, to just accept the magic. Because it's like, I know magic doesn't exist. So let me see what's behind this curtain. Whereas I know a lot of pitfalls for like beginners, it's really tough to kind of, you just take it for granted and you don't kind of know where to even start. So it's just like, yeah, it's interesting. It's a change, it's a shift in the whole mindset. Even just the concept of compiling your code first, you know, going through the compiler, waiting for it to compile, make sure it's good. And then by that point, you're probably going to be okay. Whereas like, you know, any kind of scripting language, it's all done at the same time and you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. For some reason, an analogy just came to mind of like, imagine you are trying to become a mechanic or something and you start with a fully functional, like modern car. And you're like, okay, something's broke. I need to go under the hood and fix it. And then going the other direction, though, which sounds crazy as well, is like you could become a mechanic by first building your own engine from scratch with, you know, all the parts and going and doing it that way. And it's interesting to imagine the 2 directions you could learn to become a mechanic that way. It's kind of the same with learning programming, I guess, going from C upwards or Ruby downwards into all that. What took you from PHP to Ruby?
I was really struggling between, I know this will hit home here, between Laravel and Rails. Because like I was really strong in the PHP for years. Like I did a lot of WordPress work still. Clients always ask me, so I have to make a lot of development work plugins wise there. So it's not going away anytime soon. So I figure, to bring in Ruby, I was like, should I really introduce like this whole new like thing to me when I know PHP enough, and Laravel is probably easy enough to kind of get into. But honestly, it was just, I had done one project in Rails maybe about 6 years ago, small thing for a little company. And I was like, I really liked it when I did it. And it's just one of those things where it never came up for a while. So I kind of just lost it. I was like, let me just get back into it. And I saw all the stuff that just kind of came along with it. Now when I did it was like Rails 4, I think. So it was like, it's, a couple big jumps between 5 and 6. So I was just happy to see like where things were going. And I like that. Honestly, the community brought me over too. Laravel is great and it's new, but it's still growing. Whereas like Rails seems to be like, and honestly, I'll plug you, but Go Rails was like a huge thing. Cause it was just like, it made it approachable, really easy to kind of pick up. And it was just, and if anything that I did need to dig deeper into, it like gave me good insight what I need to actually look into. And then you actually had some videos that did that too. So like, I think for fun, I went through your super beginner course you released at the beginning of the year. And let me just say, like those those things where it's like, I was happy I knew a lot of it, but I was shocked I didn't know some of it. I was like, wow, it's glad I did it. So
that's awesome.
It's one of those things where you just pick up and, and I always say this is the way things in IT and everything works. And it's just kind of scary, but in IT and programming, just because something works does not mean it's done right. And that's a huge problem, especially because, hey, look, it works, but am I secure? Am I doing things right? Is there a better way? Is it performant? So it's one of those things where it's nice to do those like basic courses because you're like, wow, the things I was doing were working, but this is better.
That reminds me of, I forget what the situation was, but I like my very first consulting job, I did a Python app with Django. I mean, it was the simplest interview thing that I could have ever had. It was basically like build a page with a form and submit it and save it to the database. And there was like 3 fields. I found it again in my email, and my basically controller action was like doing some like 3 queries just to write something to the database or whatever, like super inefficient. And I was like looking at it now and I'm like, wow, I was really bad at this. But also like, he was like, cool, it saves. And I got the job, even though it was like really terrible. Yeah. Was that project that you got with Rails something that was already existing that you worked on, or was that something that they like specifically asked you to build in Rails?
Either. It was one of those things where I was like, at the time I remember reading a little bit about it. I was just like, let me try it. And I was like, it's funny. I've been doing other like frameworks, looked into Cake PHP and things like that. And I was just looking at the Zend framework like way back in the day. And it was just like, so I was kind of familiar with the MVC like concepts. I was like, let me just try it. Because it's something I was just like, I feel like doing something new. And I think at that time I was using, someone like showed me Rails for Zombies back in the day. And I was like, it's kind of cool. Let me try it. I was like, let me try it. So I went through it and I made it was a simple enough app. I felt confident enough and they loved it. So I felt it was like a win-win all around. So it's just it's one of those few opportunities in life where it's like, it made sense to I had the timeline. It wasn't a stress timeline. So I was like, let me go along with it. And I honestly, I just slashed the price. The pricing was fair. Like I'm not one of those people that's just going to learn on someone else's dime. So, I was honest. So, and they were happy, but it was just cool to try it. And I just wanted to give it a go.
Yeah. That is one of those nice opportunities of consulting where you can kind of be like, look, we're going to try this new thing. You can't do that on an existing product most times because you got to go fix existing code or something. But maybe you get lucky and can do an extra service in a different language or something. But also, if you're the only person on the team that knows that new thing, then that can be a dangerous game to play. So it's kind of nice to have the freedom to do that consulting.
Well, that was one of the part of the things I said though, which was nice. At the time, they've no in-house developers, and I was the only one. I said, listen, you hate me, you hate my guts, get rid of me. Someone can pick up. Like this is a very standardized, like in a very big community, and it was just so that was part of the sign point too. It's like I'm not writing you 100% custom code. Someone's gonna be able to follow me pretty easily. They're like, oh, that sounds good. So that was helpful too because Rails was really big, and it's an easy sell on that point. So it was just, and at the end, they were just thrilled because even me learning was faster than they were expecting, like to do it. So it was just like, because it really was mind-blowingly quick how to do it.
That's awesome. So the reason we wanted to chat was the going from consulting into you want to build a product instead that you own, that you're going to make the decisions on, and transitioning from that it's pretty hard.
Yeah. That was, specifically, I know myself, like one of the, like I fall into what I call like the cycle of this failure where you get excited about an idea and you even do a little validation, you go through, you start programming it. And then my favorite step is the convincing yourself it's going to fail and you stop. Or even better, you convince yourself it's going to be super successful and you get scared of it, so you stop. And then you come back to it maybe, or you go to a new idea and you start over. So I know that's one of the things that I get stuck in a lot. That's like, it's just over the years, I probably have started maybe a dozen projects. And all of them, I think all of them could probably be something. So it's hard to transition, when you're the stakeholder and you're the client. It sounds like, oh, it's easy. I know what I want. Do you? It becomes an interesting challenge. It's nice to hear from other people who kind of dealt with the same thing because it's just, it's different.
I have never done that ever in my life. I don't even understand how you could do that. Like, it's just so crazy.
I know. I'm the oddball.
You start projects and you don't finish them. What is this?
I know. But gosh.
Jason and I know nothing about this.
Yeah.
I can say one of those heartbreaking things I've been listening for a long time is I remember I was with Jason on his Smoked app and I was like, that's a great idea. I love it. And I'm hearing that when Apple shut down, I was like, oh man, I felt for you, man. I was like, I like the idea. And I was like, I was rooting for you.
That came to mind yesterday when Apple was like, we're going to let people do this, but it's like, we're still going to put you through the review process. And I was like, my idea is still dead.
Yeah.
Chris and I stuck around after we recorded last week and talked for like way longer than we should have about this topic, to the point where like when he let us know like he had scheduled you today, he was like, this is very relevant because my life is, I have a similar, I don't want to call it issue, but like kind of pattern where like I very much like idea driven. Okay. Well, There we go. I have this issue where I'm very idea driven. But, the exciting part is the building because that's what I'm good at. The marketing stuff I am not good at. The talking to people I'm okay at, but I don't want to do. And so I was talking to Chris last week. I was like, if I want to build something, I'm going to have to change something about myself. It's going to be I'm going to have to learn to talk to people, learn to not be so scared to talk to people, put myself out there. And
yeah, dude, just fix your ADHD and this all goes away.
That's 5 ants. Team 5 ants.
Yeah, we need more.
Yeah, and that's an incredibly difficult thing to get over is to talking to people. And that's one of the things when I was going to start my first business, I didn't like that part at all. So one of the reasons why I brought on business partners at all at that time was I want them to do all that stuff. And it ended up hurting me because I never subjected myself to it. And it still gets to the point where it bothers me, but you just get over it, just get better at it. So it's just funny. But it's definitely one of those things where it's like a muscle once you start doing it. But yeah, I basically gave a lot of the business because I didn't want to I wanted to avoid that. So I understand exactly what you're saying.
Have you read the book, The Mom Test?
No.
It's a book about doing customer interviews, essentially. The premise is people will you also have to be careful. Talking to people isn't just gonna also solve it. It's people will tell you what you want to hear to be nice. And that's also been it's not just talking to people. I actually have to learn how to talk to people and ask the right questions. And
yeah, that's a skill set in its own. You can spend, years and years perfecting that. It's so fun when you watch somebody. I work a lot of branding and marketing agencies. And also I have a lot of friends and watching them when they know that someone who knows how to ask the right questions. It's like an art form. It's wow, you really got to the center of things really quickly. You know exactly what to ask. And even if it's a roundabout way, they knew how to get to somebody who was you may not have answered a good way if you asked directly. So no, it's interesting. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's when you ask people would you pay for this? Or how much would you pay for this? They don't know. And I think it was the Intercom founder or somebody that was talking about pricing Intercom originally. And they asked Jason Fried what his advice was. And he was charge $50 a month for it. Just see what happens. People will either pay for it or not. And we can try to get into the philosophy why people buy things. And to be honest, they don't know why they buy things. They just do. And so you can't ever really ask them directly, and they don't understand their own intuitions and stuff. So that always stuck with me because I was that is a really great point. People buy things on a whim all the time.
Yeah. I think good marketing is just a measure of subconscious suggestion. That's really what it is. You don't know why you buy stuff, and you buy the worst things. I mean, that's one of the reasons I try to, at least for like coming up with ideas, I try to think of things that help me. I know a lot of people, that's one of the things I've heard about suggestions. Otherwise, it's like the stuff, most of my ideas come from are like, well, I hate this. Hopefully other people hate it too, so I'll fix it. But it's tough to exactly that. People, will they pay for it? Don't know. Like maybe it's been more painful for me than it's been for anybody else. So it's just, the marketing. And that's one of the things I struggle with because I'm definitely not a marketer guy. So it's like if any idea for an app comes along, you have to decide, do you want to team up with a marketing person? Like I know some of the best teams, like in especially smaller startups and bootstrapped companies, have a marketing guy and a developer. Like I know one of them, like one of the ones I follow. I think you guys post it. Transistor FM is like a perfect example. Like there's just developer, marketer, and they're killing it. It's just not, and they do it in marketing is, I don't care what anyone says. Some people, I've been with a lot of developers who may like the little marketing, and it's like, I don't care how good an app is. If no one knows about it, it ain't happening. So marketing is just as important, if not more so.
What was maybe your first experience chasing an idea, like building a product outside of consulting?
I think the first one I really tried to do was, this is like 2007 or 8. And I live in Connecticut, and the nightlife was getting a little crazy. And there was no real good apps yet that were like doing a really good like job of what's happening tonight in terms of, the social media was still around, but it wasn't like what it is now. And I remember thinking so it was just like, we had even gone, that's probably the furthest I made in a lot of ways. I contacted restaurants and things to see if they wanted to be partners with it and give them free access. And, and we had all these ideas, and we've had logos, and it was just like, at the one point, it was just one of those things. I think that was one of those ones where I was anxious that it was going to become too big, and I just stopped it. Just like, So now it's like there's a million apps to do it and everything else. So that one's truly dead, I'd say. But that was just like, I bought all the domain names, and it was just like, that was probably the first time. It was just one of the things was we were looking for something to do. And it was like, well, there's nothing out there. Let's build one. And we kind of did. And I had a buddy of mine that did graphic design. So he was doing a lot of the graphics. And that was sort of just kind of, it failed. Got to the point where it's just like, yep, it's too big. And either it's going to fail or it's going to be too successful. I don't want to do it. But it was still new to the game. And I wish I knew now what I knew then. I may have gone a lot further.
Earlier, you said something that reminded me of, do you know Rob Walling from Startups for the Rest of Us and Tiny Seed? And he built a ton of little things. We'll have a link in the show notes, but he has an ebook that the title of it on its own is one of the best things. It says, start marketing the day you start coding, and other essays. And I remember like reading that title, and I was like, I don't even need to read this whole thing. Like, I know that's exactly right. That was one of those things where like me coming in and starting as a developer and then consulting, like the thing I'm most comfortable with is the coding side of things, and the marketing is not. And so that was something that I wish I had like learned or paid attention to a long time ago, because that would have saved many failed product ideas that were over the years. It's an interesting thing because like when you have to go talk to people, if these are people you don't normally enjoy talking to, that you're trying to sell to, good luck. You're not going to have a fun time doing that.
No.
Like trying to sell to, I don't know, real estate agents or somebody like, or lawyers or whatever it is. But if you're a lawyer trying to build software for lawyers, then you're going to have a fun time doing that.
Yeah.
So for me, that was like the only option I had was to sell stuff to developers, because I want to hang out with developers all day anyways. So why not? And I think along these lines, there's something to talking a lot about your idea ahead of time and just trying to find people who are like, oh, I really need that. And someone who is probably even willing to prepay you for that. You don't have to take their money, but like, if they're like, when is this going to be done? I need it now. That's kind of the thing that I didn't realize when people were saying you need to find your product market fit. Like I hate these terms so much. I don't know what that means, like they talk about it so much and it doesn't really tell you anything to go off of. And so what really nailed it home for me was I'm starting Go Rails. It's like 9 months in, nobody's really buying stuff. And then I switched to the weekly screencasts because the selling a course didn't work. And then like one day I woke up and it's top of Hacker News and like 600 new emails on my email list. And I was like, whoa, okay. So there was some piece of that. It started to click where I realized I need to spend a lot of time just publishing stuff so that people start to like remember my face and like interact with me and whatever. And then hopefully they email me and we can hop on a Zoom or whatever and just talk about what are they working on and just learn about their life. It's not anything really for like the customer development sort of aspect of this. Like I realized that I just need to find out what they're doing and I'll be able to spot things that I could build to help them. But if I do it the other way around where I'm like, hey, I'm building this thing, will it help you? That never really got me anywhere. And then there was a piece of that, which I was trying to get to, which is like, basically at some point you're going to hit this weird moment where you're starting to get people asking for new stuff. And you're like, if it's your posting blog posts, they're going to be asking you like, hey, could you write about this or that? And I noticed that happened with the videos. Like people started to ask, could you talk about devise and could you talk about whatever? And it was like, okay. So now I'm starting to feel there's some demand for it. And I'm not just putting stuff out there that's like no one really cares about. So those are a few things that I remember from the early days of like, you know, trying to go from somebody who could maybe get an inbound like referral from a previous client that referred somebody else. And I'd like sit down with them for a meeting and that's all I could do. And then trying to like turn it around and go publish stuff was super hard.
You make a good point because one of the things I think that you did incredibly well and it was a super good move was doing the Go Rail stuff because like on so many levels, obviously you're helping other people. That's awesome. 2, you're building your brand. 3, you're putting yourself as the authority. Like I'd say one thing, like if you come up like Go Rails comes up and like Reddit, everywhere else I think of if someone has an issue with Rails or has a question, like it comes up all the time. So it also makes it like, it was a no-brainer for me, for instance, when I saw that you made Jumpstart. Of course I'm going to buy it. Like the Go Rails guy does it. So that helps a lot. And so it's really like you did such a good job. So I think it's a good for anyone else to model that kind of just that process is great. Because I think that's, like you said, you marketed before you made a product really. Like I know the Go Rails itself was a good product and it wasn't, but like that was genius because it's good marketing to get yourself up. And then honestly, it doesn't matter what you do with this. Hatchbox is great. Like you're trustworthy. It makes it a lot easier. Like, you know, I'm speaking for myself here because it's, you know, any product I bought, it's like, yeah, it's no brainer. You know, Chris is doing it. So I'm sure it's going to be a great product. And so far, it's been great. Everything I've used has been great. So
you end up cheating at a point when you've established something and you can launch something new and then you've got a reputation and people will trust you. Like I think Transistor worked out because Justin had been publishing a podcast for I don't know how long. And he had communities and all the stuff that he was doing. But he even struggled for a long time trying to get any products to work. Then the funny thing is, like, he's talking about podcasting and he's doing all this podcasting stuff. And then when he finally makes a product for something he's doing every day, hosting podcasts, it like is obvious that, oh, I want to start a podcast. What's Justin use? I'm going to use what he built. And you're going to trust him for the same reasons because he's like, just written a bunch about and talked about that stuff. And I would say though, it is probably, I don't know it's not fair to call it the bootstrapper approach, but like it is a slow approach. Mm-hmm. You have to spend a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years establishing your, you know, content and credibility and gaining a following a bit. That was the problem with Go Rails. Like I had a blog that nobody read, a few people read. And then buying GoRails.com helped because SEO would be a little bit better because Rails is in the domain name and stuff. And I think that helped just having a focused site for it. But, you know, I spent 9 months blowing through all of my savings and had to get a job before like GoRails made even $500 a month. So like the first year was definitely a failure, but it worked out in the long run. And it's so slow for some of these things. So I don't really know of faster ways to do it. There may not be, or you could spend ad money and stuff. Probably if you were to invest more money, hire a marketer, or you have a co-founder that's good at marketing, then I think the other thing too is like if you're doing a one-person business, there's a lot of benefits to that where the amount of money you have to make is half what you would have to make if you had a co-founder, which is enormously useful in the early days when you want to like make a salary because that can cut the time in half. But you got to do all that marketing, which is a heck of a lot of work, which is probably more work. You need to probably invest more time into marketing. And again, this is one of those things like marketing as a term is so vague that I don't think it's super helpful to like use a lot of those terms. So I try not to, but you need to be interacting on Twitter. I think Daniel Vassallo is probably one of the best people to follow because he just goes and like shows up in random people's Twitter conversations and chips in and then shares a bunch of insightful stuff just about building a business in general or an audience or whatever. And, you know, if you're going to do that for like a real estate app, then like be following all the real estate hashtags or the people and then jump into all those conversations. And that's one way to do it. But it's a full-time job probably to do all those things. So where do you feel like you're at?
I'm probably in like my fourth iteration of kind of refining some ideas. Like, I mean, like at this point, I've decided to myself, I just want to launch something. So like you said, I think you said before, like the beginning days, like the first year was a failure. And I guess I think that's not true. You learned an incredible amount. So, and failure is going to teach you. If here's the thing, if you took off right away, you probably wouldn't be as good as you are now because it's like, it's through that you learn. So I almost want to get just a few, even if they're, I'll just shoot low. If they're mediocre to bad products, who cares? It's just you're going to learn so much about the marketing side of it, getting it out there. And most importantly, just knowing the feeling of completing a project, which is huge. I think that's just kind of where like I'm at in general. I mean, it's just like I'm trying to focus on things that I do. So I know I can use the thing myself or something like in my daily, even if it's just for keeping track of jobs or just something small that, not going to be an original idea. I've most even clients I talk to that I develop apps for. So I should talk to myself more, but when I should tell myself this, but they always say like, well, there's already this out there. I'm like, yeah, Google wasn't the first search engine, not by a long shot, you got to prove you got to do something better, and it just has to be one little thing. And it's just, and it's funny because when you think about that, it lowers the bar, like the barrier to entry is so much more. It's like, well, I don't have to be the next anything. I just have to be one better than this little bit of, thing that something else that already exists does. So it's just.
Yeah. And you also have the proof that people are willing to spend money because they're already doing it. They just may not be super happy with that.
Exactly. And that's the funny too. I've read people too that say like, a good place to start if you have an idea is to look at your competitors, like the reviews, and see what all the 1-star, 2-star reviews are, because you're going to find some common threads. In them. Like, oh, wow, they really don't do this part well. So there's certain things at that level too. But yeah, so I think it's just in general, I just want to get something out there, even if it's just a tool I can use. And if I use it, great. It'll help me anyway. If it goes anywhere, great. And like you said, being a one-person shop, like I think everyone thinks that, these SaaS products and other things have to hit, $1 million a year. Right? No, and it's a slow growth, like you said. And it's one of those things where, it's a success if you could just break even in a month. That's huge. If it's paying for itself, great. And especially if you're using it. It's paying for itself and you're using it, great. It's 2 wins. Like you make a good point with the Transistor guys. Like Justin, like you said, he had a long career before he hit it with Transistor. But if you just kind of look at the surface, you don't realize that. You have to see that it's not everything's an overnight success. And certainly your first step isn't going to be the successful one. If it is, great. But, you're probably not going to grow a lot. You're probably not going to learn a lot. So it's just one of those things. There's a double-edged sword. You have to take like the negatives and be like, well, there is a positive there. So I think that's important. And I always try to convince myself this. That's the funny thing as in consulting. I'm sure you guys say the same. You tell all the other people these things and you never tell yourself that. And it's just, so it's tough to, once again, when you're your own client, it's tough to remember that you have to take your advice that you would tell other people, and probably good advice.
I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Honey Badger. They're a single platform for air monitoring, uptime monitoring, and cron monitoring. I've blown away several people because of the real-time error monitoring with Honey Badger. I've caught an error and fixed it before the customer could even email me and say that something was wrong. They get pretty blown away by that experience, and it always makes my day. So thanks to Honey Badger for making that even possible. Star, Josh, and Ben created Honey Badger as a 100% bootstrapped monitoring solution. Without investors breathing down their necks, they can spend all their time making a better product for you, the developer. So check them out at honeybadger.io and let them know you heard about them on Remote Ruby.
One of the things like that scares me, and I ask you, see how you handle it, is like support on things. Like every time I have an issue, you pretty much handle support. Do you ever look at like outsourcing support for any of your products, or do you have any issues keeping up with support requests?
Oh boy. So I do all the support. And that's one of those things where I feel like support is marketing in a way. Like if you're really good at support, then you are building up so much trust that people will Go Rails grew through referrals and SEO and stuff. That is, I think, extremely useful to do yourself as long as you can. The reason that support is really rough these days is just Hatchbox in general is like deploying code is something that's really confusing to people because there's a million different configurations and a whole different environment that is being maintained and lots of things can go wrong. So that has a level of importance or urgency that if you have a support thing for Go Rails, like it's like, hey, I need help building this wizard thing. That might never get answered. That might get answered by somebody else in the community. You might figure it out, whatever. Like they're very low priority things. But when it's like, hey, I can't deploy my code because the Ruby version's messed up or something, like those are like much more high priority. So it's become the harder thing and seriously became, just because there's so many things that can go wrong and so on, became like a full-time job by itself, which is really rough because got other things to do. And, that was a side project making like $2,000 a month or something and spending 40 hours a week on it. And you're like, this is absolutely not worth it. Yeah. And until it becomes worth it, this is just going to be depressing to like spend this much time on. So it is one of those where you have to play into your naivete when you start, like embrace that. Like, don't worry about. So this is interesting, right? So I was concerned when I started Go Rails that if I did the weekly screencasts, I'm committing to subscriptions with people that I'm going to have to do this every week. And it took me forever to make one video that was awful at the beginning. And I was like, I can't commit to that. Like, I'm too scared of doing that. And all these people are going to subscribe, and subscribing has this weight towards like, we're paying for you to continue doing this in the future. I didn't even know if I wanted to do it. So that's why I chickened out and did courses originally. But a course, I come to learn, you're only going to buy because you can't preview the course because it's all what you're paying for. So you need a reputation or some marketing going on ahead of time. And I realized I don't know how to do that, or I haven't done it, and I need to start making money. So I switched to the weekly screencast and was like, look, I would happily continue still paying for Railscast. Ryan Bates was amazing. I learned everything from him. And I feel like I and other people would love to have that back. Maybe I'll just try that and see what happens. Maybe I'll try and fill his shoes. And that worked well. That turned out to fit what people were expecting. Much better than some random guy who nobody knows selling a $40 course with no way to evaluate if it's actually going to be worth money. And then the weekly free content meant that you could evaluate and tell if you learned something from me. And I think that's just kind of the marketing that you have to do is, can you contribute useful things to the community? And they will then follow you and see what you're doing. And that's about it. They probably do that anywhere. It changes a bit when you're a big company and you can put your logo on Reddit and YouTube and LinkedIn and whatever, or TV or you name it. And that'll get random people to show up. But those are also much more broad too. And like, I'm looking to actually meet all the people who are my early customers, because I know that if my product is not doing what they need it to do, I just ask them and they'll tell me like, hey, we need this feature. And you're like, oh, sure, on it. And, just turn around and basically treat it like you're consulting for those people. So I like doing that in the beginning because it was very helpful to like iterate. And this is what people are asking for. But again, like the mom test thing, like they don't really know what they want. So you have to be a little careful to make sure that what you make for them is actually useful to more than just one person. And sometimes they don't even need what they're asking for. They're trying to solve something and they came up with the solution. So you have to work backwards and ask what is the actual problem they're trying to deal with. But so long story short, it is a thing where you were probably going to also be just concerned with the commitment in the early days of like, if I say that I'm going to do this, I feel like I have to go do this and live up to that. But what if it doesn't work and whatever? But also, what if it doesn't work? You shut it down and you give them back their money if they gave you anything. And there is no real worst case. Like, it's really not bad. You're not going to get sued, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, barring that, you're right. I think it's an important concept to remind yourself of exactly that. It's like, what does failure look like? Because sometimes you get caught up in the label of failure and it's like, but wait, right, it's not that bad. I refund some money and then in the worst case, and I go on doing what I was doing before. Like, you're not, so it's a good point. And you still have the experience of it. So it's not going to be wasted time no matter what you do. So yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. It's funny, you mentioned before, like, to give into your naivety. I think, forgive me if I'm butchering it. But it's true, because it's interesting, because I agree. I think you almost have to some level, but then if someone like, I'm very analytical and I get a little bit like OCD, and so I'll think of every possible scenario. So, and then you wonder if you're hurting yourself or preparing yourself. That's the key. I think you're right. Yeah, you almost have to give into it and be like, you know what? When the problem arises, you'll take care of it then.
So here's a question for you and Jason. Like, have you tried to do a product with a partner and tried to do the, like, I do development, I do or the other person does marketing and whatever, sales? If you've done them, how have they worked out? Because my experience was I tried to do that many times. Like, I never considered building anything on my own for a long time. It was always like, we're going to do something together. And none of those ever went anywhere. And it's interesting that experience is probably, I think, a lot of people's experience, because you just have such, most likely, unless you're friends in college and that's all you're doing is you're going to school and decide to go build a startup. Like, if you're out of college, people have such different lives that are going on that it can be pretty hard to have two people align really well to be able to have one person contribute equally on marketing as equally on development. So I was curious what your guys' experience was, if you've done that.
Well, I've been a part of a partnership that I didn't commit to. It's called Jumpstart Pro. I was there at the beginning and then let Chris finish it. I built Hope Grid. I started off actually like as like a contractor kind of on Hope Grid. Guy who I built it with was kind of a mutual friend kind of thing. And after I was like worked on it for so long, I was like, why don't we just like partner on this thing? But that one was tough because that was one of those products. Like, so the idea is that I'm a developer and like he takes care of like selling it, marketing it, things like that. We've launched that and we still have it running, but it's not successful like in any meaningful terms. We have people who use it. That's not necessarily the fault of like it didn't work out because like one of us dropped the other end. I think it was just because we built a product that people didn't really like need, if that makes sense.
Were there other products like that out there that people pay for?
There is one, and we kind of took that as like a signal of like, oh, that's, somebody's already doing this. It's fun. Well, actually, if I'm being honest, whenever I've started to build a product, I've always looked for a unique idea. And like y'all were talking about earlier, like, I mean, obviously, like part of the problem is starting with the idea, but also like trying to look for a unique idea doesn't really solve any real problems. It just solves like imaginary problems. And then like over time, those imaginary problems you believe to be real problems.
I like that a lot because if you're doing something totally new, you have an extra challenge because you have to convince people that it's actually worth solving, even though nobody even knew that it was a problem and it may be just imaginary completely. And it's hard to imagine some of these things. Like, I can't actually think of a product that is totally new, right? Like even something fairly revolutionary, like maybe just Bitcoin or something, like still is just digital money. Like everybody can very closely see the relation to something existing already. ConvertKit was MailChimp's okay, but could use some improvements. We'll go do that. And I think Transistor was kind of the same thing. There's a lot of other podcast hosts and whatever. It's very hard to actually have something truly revolutionary. And then when you say that, I imagine the people who are like is doing their infomercials. So like, we invented this new thing. And you're like, but who needs that?
Right. Yeah. So it's not necessarily that like the relationship didn't work. We're actually like store form is actually a thing we're still talking about doing. And it's with the same guy, like I did Hope Grid with. So it's not that the relationship didn't work out, but it is tough working with someone else because like your schedules don't always align. And like alongside that, sometimes your motivation doesn't always align. Like not in terms of like what you're doing it for, but just how much energy you have to like put towards the product. And so that's made it a little challenging,
and not to mention like you have kids, you have a full-time job, and you're trying to do this on the side. It would be different if you like were both single and had no responsibilities and no jobs, and you were going to go work on something. That's a whole different story. And that's kind of the reason why I had to go quit consulting completely, because I was like, I'm going to figure this out, but I got to burn the bridges because I got to force myself, because I know nights and weekends just haven't worked for the past 7 years of trying. So, and that was easier for me when I had no responsibilities except for rent and food, you know. But that's not something you want to tell the wife when you have kids. You're like, hey, you know, that savings we don't have anymore, it's all gone.
Yeah, and coming from like a business, when I had two business partners, actually we switched partners throughout. It's one of the things I can say is that is a huge deal. Is if you guys aren't in the same like life stages, things get tough real fast. Even like, you know, I made the mistake in the past of wanting to pick a partner before a project. I think that was a bad combination too, because it has to almost organically work. You know, if you're going to partner up with somebody, it has to be almost something that like you both came to the conclusion of, or just as a natural fit. I had a buddy in college. We tried to, this is, you know, obviously a long time ago too, but we still just wanted to work together on something. It was just like, we didn't mesh well. It wasn't like the product was forced because it was just something we one of us kind of liked and then went along with it. I think it's hard the partner side is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. It's really, the other thing too is it's like, okay, I can't do marketing. I could partner with a marketing person and then who can do is really good, has a good reputation, get the word out there. But then you wonder if the market, you know, is it something that could have just been like you could have outsourced it and you didn't need them in the long run? Or, you know, because you may find out that you took on a partner that you gave, you know, a lot of portion of your idea to that you may not get along with well. And now it's like you're not just firing somebody, you're getting rid of a partner, which is really tough. So it's one of those things where it's so funny how it's like so scary and such a safety net at the same time, because it's like, well, I'm not in it alone, but it's like sometimes you may want to be in it alone. So it's something that is definitely takes time to consider, and it's not for everybody. Sometimes you just got to do it, like just go with it and see what happens.
Yeah. This time around, it's interesting because the problem we're trying to solve is a space that is like his world. It's, you know, something geared towards like print shops and promotional companies, what he does for his day job. And that's like, I mean, Hope Grid was like, you know, he's a pastor, but it's not his full-time job. So like it was kind of that world, but this is like something he deals with like 40, 50 hours a week, every week. He knows the people in that world, and there's existing products that like do what we want to do. This feels like this would be a better test of like how working with someone is maybe than opposed to like Hope Grid was.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot more sense. Like from a experience, if you're spending all of your time working with print shops, obviously it's a good thing to do. Go sell to print shops. And there's a ton of print shops, like, and they're all making money and buying software and paying for things to operate. And that's really good. Like a good place to start, I think.
Yeah. And we're trying to like start with marketing this time too. It's like, that's something we've been talking about, is much to what you were talking about earlier. Like, what are some ways we could like gain credibility before we even launch? Are there some like tools we could build, or, you know, building just kind of a strong presence and content? I don't know. And we don't know what it looks like yet, but something's got to change. I'm tired of just chasing ideas. So
it's so fun. I've heard from a lot of different places that say like, you know, yes, sell the product before it's made. And you can. It's just, yeah, if the marketing's good enough, people want, it's just fun. You don't have to put a line of code in, and you can just have the hype for it. It was some good prototype, just a screenshot, anything. And it just drives the want for it. I've seen, yeah, that's another way people do it. It was a crazy concept when I heard that. It's like, really, how can you like get behind something that doesn't exist? Well, it's like, well, they don't know it doesn't exist. I'm like, it's weird and shady, but it makes sense. So it's just, but it's an interesting concept. I think the marketing, getting that done, because that takes time. You know, if you want, so does coding and developing and everything else, but you can crank it out. But getting the word out, it has to be organic and natural, and that's just slow. Like, it's always going to be slow. there's not much you can do. So I think, it sounds like a great way to go.
I feel like I've felt the same way with, it feels shady if you're trying to sell something that doesn't exist. And I've always just tried to like, what's the tiniest thing we could do that would, still be helpful that we could charge for, and like, we'll sell that. And even if that's something that's like, it's a form that submits to Typeform or something, and we got to go do work manually to make it work, at least we're selling something they can actually use. Cause I don't, or it's kind of maybe you put up a landing page and like the pricing page, and then the checkout button actually just goes to like a email form or something. And, instead of actually charging people or whatever. But I don't know. Again, like it's one of those things where like, it's just impossible sometimes to tell if people will pay for something until, you actually charge them for it. Yeah. So it does help nail that down, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. I think I like having this idea of like a minimum viable product, because so you have something, you're standing by what you say you're going to do, and if it solves the problem, great. You can always build on that, and it just you get the feedback, and you get like you get the validation that they're using it. So I agree with that. The whole idea of like, I like the marketing ahead of time. I think that you have to do that, but when you just kind of get something you can get quick out the door. Just that works. I think I like that idea. So that's one thing I try to do myself, is not to, and it's tough because you give yourself like your whole, scope creep, where you just start adding things like, and you have to think, does it need it? And, and no problem telling a client, no, we don't really need it, blah, blah, blah. But it's yourself. It's like, no, I really want this though. So it's just, it's tough, but but I think staying lean and just getting something out there is just important.
Yeah. That's the other thing we kind of had a realization of in the last like few weeks, is we built a survey and we sent it out trying to like get some data on like what's important to you. And we got some like good responses, but it all goes back to, I don't know if these people are going to be our customers. So I am hesitant to build all the features that are prioritized here. I don't know if this like, are they going to buy this? And so that's where I'm like, this is still helpful. It gives us like a broad idea, but getting an MVP out is the thing that's going to tell me if people will actually use it or not.
You can probably still find the blog post, but when I was debating on the idea of starting Go Rails, I had posted a survey on my site and was basically just trying to collect like, who are the people on like reading my blog, and would they be interested in videos or anything? Those answers to that were fascinating, because they were very much like things that were like, I'd love to learn about like audio programming and stuff. And I'm like, nope, like that's not what I'm going to be covering here. So you'll be able to probably tell a lot of that, but I did really find the survey stuff to be useful, because you get names and emails, and then you just write them back and we're like, hey, thanks for, sending me this. Like, I'd love to hear more about what you're doing. And just like, that's it. Do as many of those as you can and just talk to as many people as possible. Cause I forget who it was that was saying basically like, you should go try and talk to all these people, just find out what they're doing. And if you have something in mind that you might want to build, you start asking them questions about like, how do you handle this problem or whatever? And once you've done enough interviews that you can predict what they're going to say, then you have a really good idea of what the market is like and how people are like, they're all struggling with the same thing. And if we go build this, we can help them with that, because now we know for sure that like there's these categories of people who are running into the same problem. And that is, I think, really interesting. It's like one of those things that I learned with Go Rails is like, there's kind of two types of customers I have. And I learned this over time. I wish I would have known it ahead of time, but I have people who are like, hey, I'm working. My boss asked me to add, avatar uploads. I watched the active storage video and then I canceled because I got what I needed, move on. And then there are other people who are like, I just want to get good at Rails and I want to be really good and keep up to date with it. And they stick around, and those are the customers I actually want, the ones who don't churn. Education is just a really hard business in general, but that is something I wish I would have known ahead of time. The interesting pieces are like, you could then optimize for one or the other at the beginning. I could probably make more money doing all those like very simple ones that people sign up and watch and pay for and then cancel, and have had a quicker time making enough money to pay my rent at the beginning if I focused on those people. But it wouldn't have been a good long-term thing, but it would have got me to paying my rent, which would have bought me the time. There's just such a different skill set you end up having to learn to go build stuff. And for me, I did want to learn the marketing, and you may not. And that can kind of drive your decisions on like, does a co-founder make sense or not? I really found that like I enjoy that piece of things. I didn't think I would. I always like, hated salespeople and whatever, because that was what you did as a CS student. Like you hated writing and you hated public speaking and whatever. And you had these like predefined like understandings of things. And like I get into it and I'm like, this is actually really fascinating. And to me, I feel most fulfilled when I know that people are using my stuff and it's contributing to the community and whatever. So the consulting was never fulfilling because I go build one app for one client and 3 people would use it, maybe, if I was lucky. And it just never felt fulfilling. But then if I did open source or something, then it was like, wow, I can see all these people using it in ways I never imagined, and super cool. And I want to do more of that. And that was like, videos are helpful for doing that. And that's kind of where GoRail started. But yeah.
And that's what's always kind of driven me. I make a good point. It's like, and a lot of people ask me, why I like, why do you like programming? It's like so boring and blah, blah, blah. It's like exactly what you said. I'm not good with my hands. I'm not building anything for real. So, but having something that someone uses, like that just means everything. I 100% agree. That's when I really got, I always liked computer science, but like when I built the first app I did for like the university I worked for, and then I found out like everyone's using it. It was like, first, it was like panic attack. It's like, oh my God, they're using it. Then I was like, wow, they're using it. And then even after I left, I found out like someone who worked there, after 5-6 years later, they're still using it. I was like, wow, like that's incredible. There's something to that. It's like a bit of a rush to see people using something that, you created. And then I think that's definitely, I think a lot of passion behind a lot of these developers. It's just like, money's great. You need it to survive. But I think it's just nice that the satisfaction you get someone, you're helping somebody by, something you made. That's just awesome. So that's definitely.
Well, I have good news for you that's how every successful business works.
Yeah. I hope so. All right. Step 1, checked off.
Yeah, it just becomes how do you get people to use it? And honestly, too, one of those things that you can always do that isn't great necessarily for your business, but you can go build it and don't charge money and just take some. I think the interesting thing too is you have to be very careful about who you're talking to in the early days and who you're listening to, because some people are very like specific on their needs, but you want to listen to the people who will end up being your general audience or general customer base in the long run. So like GoRails could have been videos on like super focused performance or, whatever little topic, but I wanted it to be generally useful. So I had to like go and listen to the people asking for like, how do I build features instead of like, how do I do scaling and, worry about optimizing memory usage and all this stuff. There's definitely a market for that, but it's a different business. Like that is Nate Berkopek's business and he does amazing with that. And so like that fits if you want to do that, but you have to listen to the customers that you want to, that are kind of aligned with your business idea and your goals. And that's something that like I didn't do very well in the early days. I feel like I was just trying to please anybody because I was trying to make $1 from any way possible, and
yeah, I think anybody who's ever started anything knows that feeling. It's just that's how you know the people who just started out. Like, really, you give me $1 to do what? Sold.
Yeah, those early adopters will be unique people that are willing to try something new, and honestly, like, don't charge them. Do whatever you can to make it a staple of their business. Where at some point they're like, we couldn't operate without your product anymore, and then you're like, okay, this is good. And we have a relationship with them and hopefully it's good enough for you to say, okay, would you mind paying $500 a month for this? If it's like crucial to your business, you can pitch them a low number or whatever. And then hopefully they'll say yes. But if they say no, who cares? Because guess what? Your business is going to have to depend on 1,000 other customers. So if you gave it away for one, what's it matter? They helped you start and build the right product or whatever. So I think that's a good option too, to help, as long as you find the right people. It's basically like make it work for them, but in a generic way that applies to everybody else, and kind of almost treat it like consulting. If you're familiar with consulting, it ends up being a nice approach, but there's definitely pitfalls you have to be very aware of as you go.
That sounds like, I like that idea. It sounds really good. Like just to have, like, I always kind of envisioned having like just like a user base right off the bat. That just kind of has to be your beta testers, your feature testers. And you're always going to get like, either free or very low cost just to keep them on. I agree with it. I think that's just nice to have someone using it and giving you fee. Even if it's free, like you said, it's still feedback you're always going to get, and the source of new features and things that you may not have thought of.
So do you have any of your product ideas that are at a point where you could start getting people to use it, or any of those? And also the other question too I had was like, imagine the ROI on these ideas. What is the one that's going to have the best, it's not necessarily the least amount of work, because they're all going to be a ton of work no matter what you do, but some are going to be way more profitable than others.
Yeah.
And do you have one that is clearly a winner there? That's probably like, if I do this, then it has potential for higher pricing and hopefully less effort. Because I've stumbled into that weirdly. Like I do weekly screencasts as a subscription, Hatchbox as a subscription. Jumpstart was a one-time payment originally. Courses were one-time payments. So I dabbled with subscriptions, one-time payments, and several very different types of products, because the content business is very different than actually building and running software. And so I was worried about burning out with GoRails, and I was definitely burning out for a long time. But then building software gave me ideas for screencasts that I could feed off of. And then that made it sustainable for me. And I was like, that's interesting. But then I discovered like Hatchbox's support load is super high, and it is not a profitable business, like screencasts can be. If I have a good flow of ideas, like there was a point in time where I worked 1 day a week and worked 4 days a month, and I made a whole salary. And I was like, this is amazing. Like it was a junior dev salary or whatever, but like, I can work 4 days a week and do whatever I want. And that ROI is totally different than the ROI that I get from Hatchbox or whatever. And Jumpstart's different as well. And it ebbs and flows and whatever. But some products have a lot of ongoing maintenance, like Hatchbox. Some don't. Like Jumpstart has way less. And GoRails is a weird one where it's like the videos are only relevant for certain topics for a year before the gem gets outdated and whatever. So it's some weird in between too. So I was just curious if you have any thoughts to share there on your product ideas or anything.
Yeah, so one of the things that I struggle with, like, there's obviously you always have to pick between going a product that's to a consumer versus a business. And I think I've, for one thing, settled on a business. I feel like consumers are way too used to spending nothing or like $5 a month. So I figured that anything I do with that would be like, maybe I would do it.
I just want to also throw in there that like I typically always hear, and I always think this way too, but like selling to consumers or business. But I think I've noticed recently that there's really like a prosumer category that you can go for too, that is often overlooked, which I think are the people that, I don't know, at a high level, I think you've got, when you sell to businesses, you have more responsibility by default, but you can charge more. Then consumers are low responsibility, low value as well. Yeah. And then prosumers are a weird mix in between.
Yeah. I didn't even think about the prosumer side of it, but it's true. Yeah,
and that could even be something as simple as like, we don't sell to businesses that are 100 employees or more. We sell to like other startups or whatever, which is like they're willing to spend $100, $200 a month, but they're also not individuals who will never pay that much, which I thought was interesting. Like there's some middle ground too. But anyways.
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking of is I had a client who I did some work with for their electrical contractor, and they have some things that just like are, keeping track of their day-to-day and things of that nature. And there's other tools that can do it, but they all, same kind of, the story I always hear is things are way too big, way too expensive. So I was like, so I was thinking about working with them to kind of get something out that would help their day to day. And then once you kind of pull that out, extract that to be more generic for a product and that sort of thing. And I figured something like that, because it's funny you mentioned it, because one of the things in my head is like for like you mentioned hatch boxes, that is like mission critical stuff. So I get, so when you start doing that, it's like someone's down when they're calling you, where it's like, Jumpstart Pro and else. It's like they're having questions I could probably wait a day or two. So it's just, it's almost like finding that line of where I don't want to be mission critical, but I want to be important.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to find. I'm trying to hover that line. So I think to myself, it's like, if this system I'm thinking of is down for 4 hours, what would it mean? And it's like, if I'm getting, bombarded with calls or and there's no way around it for them, I probably wouldn't want that as my first product to really get out there before I go. So I'm trying to hover between like just being something it's important to have, but they're not going to be dead in the water without it. So it's just how much you want to take of it. That's kind of where I'm hovering. We're just trying to come up with an idea that'll work. I want to replace the Excel sheets that a lot of these companies that I use for like they're running their business, because that's the biggest thing I find. People use Excel sheets way past when they should to keep track of their entire business. But then they can't afford to go with the 6-figure softwares that are out there that take an extra person to hire that just trains them how to use the software. So it's like there's the biggest stuff. So, I'm trying to find like you said, a startup or something smaller, like those kind of businesses that just, they know they need something bigger than what they have right now. But it's a dance for trying to find the exact footing where I want to be.
So have you thought about going to, sounds crazy, but like going to local chamber of commerce meetings and things like that, and meeting like wherever the electrical contractors and roofing contractors and plumbing business owners, where do they go to these like meetings and stuff? Like they probably do. And they probably all kind of know each other. And also maybe you can do something that's generic enough where it could work for roofers and electricians and plumbers or HVAC or whatever.
And it's funny you mentioned, because one of the things, the benefits of coming from my last business was I did a lot of networking. So I was in all different local networking groups and everything else. So it's like, I not only had those contacts, but you hear the same things, the same problems for all those groups. So it's a good, but I recommend most people would do that. Like start local, get the people you talk to. It's exactly that. You hear this common problems, you have a good rapport with them already. And it gives you the ideas that kind of go, and it gives you just a nice client base. So that's one thing I'm very thankful for, because if I was just starting out and had no contacts, I feel much more anxious about what to pick. So luckily I have a good connection with a lot of like trades, and because believe it or not, a lot of those do join those groups, just the local networking groups, and I spend a couple of weeks just visiting groups. That's the thing too. Pro tip, but most of these groups don't charge any kind of membership to visit. So go visit them, take a look, and you learn a lot. And that helps a lot to get your ideas and meet people. And a lot of people are more than willing to sit down with you and discuss some of the problems they're having, because you can help them.
And who else are they going to talk to, right? Like they're not going to come home and, talk to their kids about, it's like, I don't know how to organize my business anymore.
Exactly.
Like, it's so hard to find other business owners to like talk to that. Like I would go out to all this meetups and other like small business stuff when I was consulting, because guess what?
Yeah.
Like I can help build your MVP if you just raise money from an angel investor or whatever. And all those things were really good to meet people locally, but then word spreads too, right? Like you help somebody. And then like I had a client that was probably referring 90% of my business because he just like really loved working with me. And he had such a good network that when he would tell people, they trust him because he's successful. Yeah. And then they'd reach out to me, and I was able to do a ton of money and projects because of him, because he typically was the person that they heard about me from. And so, especially if you're doing something like that, where you're like, we're going to go help electricians, and you just go talk to 30 electricians and find out what software they're using, what's the worst part of their job, those types of things.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised what you find out, and, buy them lunch. Or whatever, like little simple things go a long, long way there. I think those are good ways to do it in person. And I don't know, I'm sure you can do the same sorts of things online, on Twitter or whatever. If you're trying to do something that isn't local, you can always start local first, because that's really pretty easy. So,
and it gives you the practice, I think, because when you're talking to somebody, even on the phone as opposed to just on the internet, like you get the nuances and you understand, like, you know how to talk through things. Or if you just ask a general statement on the internet, you get a statement back. And it's like, that could be like, if you said, is that the real answer? I don't know. But you have a conversation, a real live conversation with, especially in person, you can kind of read body language, read everything. You know the pain points when you talk to somebody in person about their business. It's just, I think that's, and once you're going to get good at that, I think you can navigate that virtually better. And it's tough because I know once, we talked about earlier, it's like getting over the fear of a lot of people have the fear of just talking and sitting down and talking to people. And it's just, I definitely have always had that. But it's just, once you get over it, you just kind of push yourself to do it and it gets easier every time. And one of the things I'll say too is
it does
practice. Because once you don't do it for a while, it's like you set yourself up and it's like you start it over again. But
yeah, it is a muscle that you got to train.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. I remember being in college or just out of college or something, and Julian Smith's book, The Flinch, came out, and it was like, hey, you have to notice that flinch where you're like, I should go talk to this person and introduce myself at the Chamber of Commerce meeting, but I feel awkward and I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And his book was about like recognize those moments. And like one of the parts of the book was like, talking about like a cold shower is not something like comfortable. And it's like, okay, I told you and you flinched.
Yeah.
So go do it right now while you're reading the book. And like, I know that most of you won't do it, but the people who did then, have overcome the flinch. And I was like, this is so good. Yeah. And that really helped me at that time when I was struggling with that. Cause like, yeah, not really a person who likes to go socialize with random strangers. Yeah. But when I did go to like places with startup stuff, then like I could talk to pretty much anybody there because they're interested in startups and we're all trying to figure out the same thing. So it wasn't so bad after all, once I started doing it. And it's a lot of that, overcoming your own psychology too. Because guess what? At the end of the day, you can figure it out. It's just, you're probably going to hold yourself back more than anybody else will.
True.
So.
Absolutely. I'm definitely my own worst enemy person. I know that's the same for a lot of people. It's true. It really is.
Anyways, we've been on for quite a while, so we should probably wrap it up. But huge thanks for coming on and talking about this stuff. I think Rails is an entrepreneurial community, so this is all super useful to talk about, I think.
No, thank you for having me. I think I definitely always look forward to even the episodes we've had before. It's just because this is like a lot of insight to behind the scenes, and it's nice to know other things people are going through. And so it's so I appreciate you having me, and hopefully this will help someone I'm sure a lot of people like me out there. So hopefully someone will get something out of it.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I got something out of it. So thanks for chatting with us today.
Thank you.
We'll put links to your Twitter, whatever, in the show notes. Do you want to tell us what your Twitter is?
Believe it or not, I'm between Twitters right now. I have one for my old business. I haven't started up on a new one. Isn't that funny?
Somebody needs to start marketing.
I know. That's my issue. Yeah. So no Twitter yet.
All right. Well, when you do, we'll have it in the show notes then. So is there anywhere else people can find you online?
Yeah, I got my website, sabettaconsulting.com. That's the best part. As I get into social media, I'll definitely be posting my profiles up there.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next week.